The Yamashiro should have been scrapped in the 1930s. She was an experimental and peculiar piece of naval technology, born from a volatile era in maritime development which had no place in the battlefields of World War II. However, an unexpected chain of events kept her and her World War I-era sister ships from the scrapyard. Instead, it thrust them into the Pacific theater of the war's decisive closing stages. In a last-ditch effort to change the outcome, Japan sent out these aging warriors in a bid for survival. This set the stage for a dramatic and fierce confrontation in the Surigao Strait. The Yamashiro and her sister ship, Fuso, faced off against the American battleships California, West Virginia, Maryland, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, vessels resurrected from the depths of Pearl Harbor. In the pre-dawn darkness of October 25, 1944, the seas churned as the last battleship-to-battleship clash erupted. Outgunned and outclassed, the Yamashiro and her crew were prepared to fight to their last breath and meet their fate with honor. The American fleet attempted a devastating naval tactic known as crossing the T. The battle's outcome and the honor of the valiant Yamashiro were entangled in this daring move, which the Americans had not effectively used since 1898. The sailors on the Yamashiro had to fiercely defend their country's honor, but today we have something equally important to protect: our online privacy. Our personal information is in grave danger from a new enemy: data brokers. These high-tech menaces roam the internet, collecting, packaging, and selling your personal information without your consent. Every like, share, or even simple online activities are tracked and traded in a vast data marketplace. The sale of this data poses significant risks. It could lead to identity theft, make you a target for phishing scams, or even expose your personal beliefs and location to those who might misuse it. Your personal photos or even details about your family could fall into the wrong hands, leading to potential harassment or worse. Fortunately, we at Dark Seas have a steadfast ally on board. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that actively hunts down and removes our information from hundreds of data brokers year-round, vastly reducing our digital footprint and enhancing our privacy. Our Delete Me dashboard shows the number of sites where our data was removed, along with all the personal details that were found and deleted, bringing an invaluable sense of security. And here's the great news. If you want to sign up for the war on data brokers with Delete Me, you can get 20% off their services by clicking the link in the description below and using the promo code DARKSEAS. Remember, it's not just about protecting yourself, it's about safeguarding your family's privacy too. Take action, take control, and let Delete Me help you maintain your digital dignity. With the introduction of just one warship, HMS Dreadnought, in 1906, the face of naval combat was permanently altered. This massive British undertaking distinguished pre-Dreadnought and post-Dreadnought naval design periods. Equipped with fearsome artillery and a powerful turbine engine, HMS Dreadnought quickly rendered all previous battleships obsolete. Every country in the world was compelled to change or fall behind. The effects were especially detrimental to Japan. The Empire of the Rising Sun hesitated, despite having led the world in naval warfare technology and possessing the only modern fleet that had been put to the test in combat following their victory in the Russo-Japanese War. They would later come to regret delaying the building of Dreadnought-class ships in large quantities. Japan eventually had to change course and create the Kawachi class, their first dreadnoughts, which were finished in 1909. By now, most naval nations had amassed an unassailable lead in the quantity of dreadnoughts. Now, Japan had the difficult challenge of establishing its maritime superiority in a different manner. Sensing that time was running out, the Japanese government enacted the Emergency Naval Expansion Bill in 1911, which sped up the building of the modern battleship Fuso. The goal of the new design was to provide Japan with a dreadnought that could stand up against any contemporary battleship on the planet. Fuso was unprecedented on many levels, as it was also the first Japanese battleship to be constructed domestically rather than in foreign shipyards. Following Fuso's construction, Yamashiro, her sister ship, was laid down on November 20th, 1913, right before the Great War was set to swallow the world. From 1917 to 18, Yamashiro served in the 1st Division of the 1st Fleet. The Central Powers had withered away from East Asia when she was organized and prepared for battle. Nevertheless, during the war, she did a brief patrol off the coast of China. Though she was never given the chance to demonstrate her combat prowess, Yamashiro became the first Japanese battleship to deploy an aircraft, when, on March 29, 1922, she skillfully launched a Gloucester Sparrowhawk fighter from her deck. In September 1923, the Great Kento earthquake struck the Tokyo and Yokohama regions. The disaster was cataclysmic, registering 7.9 on the Richter scale. It triggered fires that blazed for days, amplifying the destruction. Over 140,000 people lost their lives, and countless homes and buildings were reduced to rubble. The Imperial Japanese Navy battleship Yamashiro was instrumental in the rescue attempts during this crisis. Yamashiro, stationed nearby, moved quickly to aid the survivors. The ship's communication technology proved crucial in organizing relief activities, and the crew gave the displaced people food, shelter, and critical medical attention. Yamashiro became a floating command center for the rescue efforts. Many people in Japan warmly remembered her for her crucial role during this disaster. By the end of the 1920s, it was apparent that Yamashiro was out of date, and Japan needed to turn its attention to more advanced, potent battleship designs. There was only one big problem: they could only use the warships they already possessed. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 and the London Naval Treaty of 1930 strictly limited the number and displacement of battleships and battlecruisers that a nation could own. These agreements sought to foster stability and avert an arms race. As a signatory, Japan was permitted to retain some existing ships, such as Yamashiro, but was required to restrict the building of new vessels. Although common sense dictated that Yamashiro should be decommissioned, Japan chose to modernize and enhance her in order to maintain a combat-capable and robust fleet. The ship's restoration started on December 18, 1930, at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. Torpedo bulges were installed, armor was strengthened, and her machinery was rebuilt. Yamashiro's torpedo tubes were removed, and her armament was modernized. On November 15, 1934, Captain Shoichi Nagumo assumed command of the ship. On March 30, 1935, her refurbishment was finished, and she was designated as the Combined Fleet's flagship. Even with her upgrades, Yamashiro was viewed as antiquated in comparison to Japan's most advanced and potent battleships. The Yamato class stood out among these cutting-edge ships as the epitome of naval engineering. One of the biggest and most powerful battleships ever constructed, Yamato was the lead ship and went into service in December 1941. The most significant naval weaponry ever installed aboard a battleship, Yamato's 9 46cm or 18.1-inch main guns weighed in at more than 72,800 tons when fully loaded. When Musashi, her sister ship, was put into service in August 1942, it too had the same intimidating characteristics, making both ships much more potent than Yamashiro. The Nagato class, comprising Nagato and Mutsu, was another noteworthy class. Despite being put into service in 1920 for Nagato and 1921 for Mutsu, both underwent a significant renovation in the 1930s. These improvements brought the armor and armament up to date with modern standards. Having increased their speed to 25 knots, they were able to meet the changing needs of naval combat. These modern battleships became the nucleus of Japan's naval might, with Yamashiro serving as a reservist. She would only be asked to respond in the most dire situations. Because of her old age and design compared to younger battleships, Yamashiro's primary function at the start of World War II was defense and training. She supported Japanese soldiers in the wars in the Philippines and the Dutch East Indies by taking part in patrol work and coastal defense exercises. As the war began to turn against Japan in 1943, a large number of its most potent capital ships had been lost or severely damaged. After that, Yamashiro was moved a bit nearer to the storm's center and started doing sporadic convoy escort duties. She did, however, spend the bulk of her time in Japanese territorial seas, ready to repel any possible Allied assault. Regardless of age, every ship that remained in the Japanese Navy's possession became an invaluable tool as the Allies continued their inexorable push across the Pacific. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Yamashiro, with her worn hull and antiquated weapons, was called upon to perform a crucial role. Although few alternatives remained, the admirals understood that they were sending Yamashiro into combat against overwhelming odds. As part of Japan's desperate attempt to change the course of the war, the battleship that was supposed to be demolished more than 10 years earlier was now a component of the Southern Force. The Japanese Southern Force, led by Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, attempted to assault Allied forces landing in Leyte Gulf by navigating the Surigao Strait. This was part of a larger plan to cut off the Allies' supply routes and thwart their invasion of the Philippines. Nishimura's fleet included the battleships Yamashiro and her sister ship Fuso, the heavy cruiser Mogami, and 4 destroyers. On the other side, U.S. Admiral Jesse B. Oldendorf prepared for a night battle to block the Surigao Strait. The northern end of the strait led to Leyte Gulf, and Oldendorf knew he could trap the Japanese with his massive fleet. At the center of his battle line were veteran Pearl Harbor ships West Virginia, Maryland, California, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee, all of which had been sunk or heavily damaged during the Day of Infamy. The remaining American force also included 4 heavy cruisers, including an Australian ship, 4 light cruisers, and 28 destroyers, both American and Australian. Since the Japanese were notorious for their nighttime torpedo attacks, Oldendorf wanted absolute superiority by strength in numbers. He later stated, quote, "We didn't want them to pull another Savo Island on us." The Battle of Savo Island had been a humiliating defeat for the United States, leaving 4 Allied cruisers at the bottom of the ocean. Each available PT boat was placed at the southern entrance of the strait, with 39 of them patrolling at night. They were tasked with attacking any incoming Japanese vessels with torpedoes, followed by attacks from destroyers. Then cruisers and battleships would engage with their guns should the Japanese get within range. 2 Japanese task forces were on the southern route to Leyte and needed to pass through the Surigao Strait, tucked between the islands of Panon and Dinagat. The Japanese hoped both task forces would arrive simultaneously to support Vice Admiral Kurita's push from the other side of the Gulf. However, they struggled to coordinate due to the Imperial Japanese Navy's radio silence to avoid alerting the enemy. In a twist of fate, Kurita's force was slowed by intense air attacks, leaving Vice Admiral Nishimura's force to approach Surigao Strait alone, with Vice Admiral Shima's force trailing about 25 miles behind. Nishimura's force, including Yamashiro, was attacked by bombers on October 24th, but they only suffered light damage. Both he and Shima's teams managed to evade most of the attention from American aircraft carriers before reaching the strait's entrance. Oldendorf had already dispatched his destroyers and PT boats to the anticipated path of the Japanese Navy. As Nishimura's force entered the strait, it sailed straight into the jaws of the American 7th Fleet Support Force. Despite their readiness, the American battleships were expected to focus on shore bombardment rather than engaging warships. They carried more high-explosive shells than armor-piercing ones suited to take down battleships. The American vessels were also running low on fuel, adding another layer of challenge to the imminent clash. As Nishimura's fleet approached the strait on the night of October 24, 1944, they were harassed by American PT boats. Although the boats didn't score any hits, they provided critical intelligence on the Japanese advance. The American destroyers, however, were more effective, launching torpedo attacks that crippled Fuso and sank 2 Japanese destroyers. Fuso, heavily damaged and ablaze, eventually fell. Yamashiro, under Nishimura's command, pressed on into the strait. At this point, Oldendorf executed a classic naval maneuver known as crossing the T. This tactic allowed the American battleships to unleash their full broadside firepower against the approaching Japanese ships, which could only reply with their forward guns. Yamashiro was subjected to intense fire from multiple American battleships and cruisers equipped with superior radar-guided targeting systems. West Virginia was the first to open fire, followed by California and Tennessee, effectively decimating Yamashiro's defenses. Despite the relentless barrage, Yamashiro and Mogami continued to fight. Just after 3 a.m., however, a torpedo from one of the American destroyers struck Yamashiro. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The ship shuddered violently as the explosion tore through its hull. Crew members were thrown off their feet, the force of the blast reverberating through the hull. Chaos ensued on Yamashiro's deck. Flames erupted, casting a hellish glow over the night sea. The crew scrambled to contain the inferno, but the damage was extensive. Compartments began to flood, and the battleship started to list. Despite the valiant efforts of her crew, the situation rapidly deteriorated. The storied battleship, the last hope of the Imperial Japanese Navy, was now a burning, sinking hulk. As Yamashiro rolled over and began to sink, the fate of her crew became sealed. Men who had survived the initial explosion now faced the terrifying possibility of drowning or burning to death. Admiral Nishimura went down with his ship. The obsolete Yamashiro, with her weakened force and war-worn crew, had no chance of confronting the might of the U.S. Navy. When Oldendorf crossed the T, he sealed her fate. A Fern Dark Seas salute to Delete Me for sailing with us today. Remember, you can take advantage of this exclusive 20% off deal for US consumer plans and defend your privacy from stealthy enemies lurking in the depths of the internet by clicking the link in the description. It's not too late to win the battle.